Hello, folks. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic Recon, Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. And before I get to my guest, I want to remind you to subscribe to my channel, visit eddietrask.com and send reverts and converts there so they can get in touch and be on this show. And also, new episodes air every Tuesday at 3 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. This week's guest is a very good friend of mine, Fernando. Hey, bud.
Eddie, thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Why don't you pronounce your last name so I don't botch it?
Sure. So Fernando Aceves.
Aceves. Okay, easy. So Fernando is a lawyer. Every time I say he's a lawyer, I think of Tracy Morgan on SNL when he used to play Star Jones, and he would just jump in and say, "I'm a lawyer." Anyway. So he's a lawyer. He has a family of 6, so he has 4 little ones. And I met Fernando, I believe, 6 months ago. We hit it off. Just a really good friend, faithful, devout Catholic. And so I just wanted him to come on and share his story. So with that, buddy, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks for asking me to do this. I haven't shared my story in a really long time. I hope you don't mind. As you know, I'm at work, so it's kind of lame setting. I wish I were sitting at home doing this, but happy to do this during my lunch hour. So not that lawyers really have a lunch hour, but I'm happy to take the time to do this. But anyway, so in regard to my journey, I'm a Cradle Catholic. My parents have both been Cradle Catholics as well. Both of them, they are from Mexico originally. They moved here at a young age to the U.S. and met in California. I was born in California, moved to Idaho when I was 4. And, the Catholic faith was an essential part of our family life growing up. I remember an early story in terms of understanding my cradle Catholicism. My parents, when we moved to Idaho, we had no family there. And as I reflected on their Catholicism growing up, it's always been really good for me to recognize that it was deeply rooted in their own lives, and they shared that with us. So we would do, I think a nightly, maybe if not like 3 or 4 nights a week, we would say a rosary. Of course, we went to Mass every Sunday. I don't remember ever missing Mass as a child. And, but it wasn't like they were necessarily it wasn't like we were being catechized or like it was like a homeschool family or anything. It was just a natural part of our lives. And so much so, kind of like that, a story that I share when I moved to Idaho, especially as a young Mexican American. I grew up, Spanish was my first language. So when we moved to Idaho, which is a predominantly not Hispanic state, especially North Idaho, I said to my mom, so I was 5 at the time, and I said, what am I going to do in Idaho? How am I going to marry somebody who prays the rosary? And how am I going to find a wife who prays the rosary? So clearly it was a part of my upbringing. But for the most of my life, Catholicism was just something that we did, and was generally boring. I would go to catechism and stuff, and but I did pray a lot. I mean, I know my mom has a really strong faith, and she always encouraged the faith and praying, and just it was very obvious that it was a part of her nature. So I grew up believing in God, believing in the tenets of the faith, not really asking too many questions, and being raised in secular society. So, meaning through the public school system.
Sure.
So over time, the faith was just kind of in the background. And it wasn't until I think I was in middle school. My mom caught wind of a really good youth program going on at a parish across town, and she decided that we were going to switch parishes to join for that reason. So my sister at the time, I only have one sibling, and she's 5 years older than me. Her name's Lily, and she was a huge influence on my life in every capacity, not just in this way. But when she joined youth group and started to make a lot of new friends in youth group and started to become active, like with retreats and then in the future with Reach Youth Ministries, which was a youth program based out of Yakima, Washington at the time. It basically, her influence, her faith and her influence on me had a huge impact. I kind of saw her and her friends as people who were just wonderful. And she started doing things like going to daily mass, which I didn't realize was the thing until I saw high schoolers and young adults kneeling in front of the tabernacle, and just stuff that I found to be completely surprising. I remember one distinct experience that I had was my sister really ministered to me in one moment. I forget why, but she asked me if I wanted to pray with her. And she kind of instructed me. Like she basically said, close your eyes and I'm going to pray with you. And she laid her hands on me, you know, and I remember like getting emotional. I felt like it was looking back, it was an encounter with Jesus. And so I always looked up to her. You know, she had a lot of really cool experiences in the faith where that I found to be beautiful and true. Like, I think she introduced me to theology of the body at a young age. I think I was in middle school, or maybe, probably 8th grade, coming into 9th grade. And on top of that, I joined the middle school youth group too. And my youth minister, who continues to be a friend and a mentor to me. His name's Brian Kraut, and I'll be sure to share this with him. But he was a major influence on my life. I would call Brian a disciple, a continual disciple. He's the director of evangelization for the Diocese of Spokane, Washington right now. Just a phenomenal person. I mean, this was back before a lot of the child protection policies were in place for the church, which are probably rightfully in place, but it really limits what can be done in terms of mentorship. And so back before all that stuff happened, Brian would be the kind of guy who would take me, drop me off at home after youth group, or take me out to lunch. And we just had, it was just a really good opportunity to talk about things that I didn't talk about at home, and to have real relationships in the faith, and good examples of men who took their faith seriously. So we would, Brian was my mentor all the way, like I said, until now. I mean, he in high school, he would call me out on things when I wasn't in the right place. If I ever, we played disc golf, we played all kinds of games with guys, friends growing up, and it was an opportunity for me to have that outlet in terms of spiritual life, because like I said, as a Catholic, you go to mass and then you go home and then you do the rest of the public school stuff, and it's not like Catholics are in general as active as maybe other denominations. So going into high school, though, I was really, and some of middle school, just intrigued by the worldly stuff. I mean, I never really knocked my parents on anything. Every family has their own faults, but I think one of the things that I look back on is just the access that I had to, let's say, television and internet, which even back then is nothing compared to what it's like now. But the influence that had on me, and the attraction toward like things of the world or sexuality at a time when I probably needed to be more sheltered, was led me down some paths that I wish I wouldn't have gone down, including pornography and other things similar on live television, like watching MTV every day. Just being intrigued by all the pop culture. And coming into high school, that was kind of my world, was playing sports and thinking about girls and all that. So as I got into high school, I really got into football. Football was a huge part of my life. my head coach lived across the street from me. It was the type of thing where that's where I realized that I had a gift, and that maybe I would probably go to college and play. And because of football, I think, and the success there, I started to kind of fall off track and get away from the values that I had been taught growing up, especially as a young man. So, I got into a couple of relationships that led me off track. Unfortunately, lost my virginity in high school, which to me was a breaking point, because I knew that, that was something that my parents really talked about, would be sexual morality, and the values that we had as Mexican Americans. As being Mexican to them meant holding on to family values, morals, and things that they saw in American culture that were bad. So I grew up basically with them saying, I would say that they were probably a lot better than a lot of families in terms of wanting to enculturate. First of all, moving to North Idaho, a place that's predominantly not Hispanic, but also, somewhat assimilating to culture and society here in America, but at the same time saying like, hey, we're not American. And what they meant by that was, we're not going to let you guys take on American values, which were, those of liberties or
Yeah.
sexual liberties.
Well, those of the world, really. I mean,
I agree. But at the time, they were becoming like mores that were trying to be normalized here. Like, let's say watching Friends on TV.
Yeah.
There were things that they would never allow, including, in I guess in theory, it would be like, you're not moving out of the house really until you're married, which didn't end up happening. But they were the type of things that where they held like family values and marriage as important, or potentially the priesthood, which wasn't ever really encouraged or pushed in my family, but it was seen as an option. So when that happened in high school, I knew that I had kind of crossed the line into something that wasn't right.
yeah.
And I wasn't like a huge partier in high school, but it was definitely there, and there was a desire for that, and it was heading in that direction. So there were at the time I still had the relationships with youth group and relationships with Brian Kraut and and my sister, and there were some real, like, in terms of talking about conversion, I think there were moments there of real conversion when I was like 16, 17. And I can think of like 2 or 3 circumstances that were encounters with real Christians, real Catholics, that brought me back to the faith and made me want to change my ways, So one of them would be my junior year of high school. That was the year that the Passion of Christ movie came out.
Okay.
And I was invited by my youth minister to go watch it. And, I said, hey, free ticket to the movies, sure. And I was Catholic, so I cared. I just remember watching the movie, and I specifically at the moment of the scourging of the pillar, just weeping.
Yeah.
And it was a realization that I had been a part of that sin that Christ was taking on, that I had really stepped away from God. And realizing that I wanted to be with God and I didn't want to be participating in that sin. That was, I think, a kind of a moment of realization. That didn't mean that it changed, unfortunately. I still had other idols, I still wanted football to be the most important thing. And as a 16, 17-year-old, it's really hard to let go of those things because they're part of your everyday life. Sure. And it would mean making like a huge change. And I knew that there were things in my life that were kind of aiding in the selfishness or the like ego of a 16, 17-year-old. So the summer after that, so before senior year, I had a couple conversations with a couple of young men who were just really great examples. And one of them being Paul Hudson, he's a friend in Washington State. I remember a conversation with him where he asked me about my girlfriend for some reason, and he just straight up said, "So, are you having sex with her?" And I could not believe that he asked me that question. First of all, it was a question that it's not asked every day.
Sure.
So essentially I told him, and it was a moment of real, calling out, and a real, he basically just said, "Hey, that's not right." And he prayed with me. He asked me to pray with him, and we did a chaplet of divine mercy in that moment.
Wow.
And then he said, "Do you want to go to?" We went to adoration together in that moment. So Paul was my sister's good friend, and my sister was living in Yakima, Washington at the time because she did reach. So this is there's a lot of background here that I'm not really sharing, but she was heavily involved in the faith, and was deeply rooted in the faith, and her living with good roommates, and Paul was a really good friend, continues to be a good friend of hers. Paul and Katie are married, and they're godparents to their oldest daughter. And Paul was at her apartment, and we went to get burgers, and that's when this conversation happened. So I remember just being floored by that conversation, and kind of confirming the fact that I had been living two lives, and a life that was really not going down the right path. And so I'll spare some of the details in terms of kind of the ugliness of what happened during that junior year of high school. But there was a moment when I realized that I needed to make a change in my life. And usually, so as a kind of a note, every summer I would go to football camp, and football camp always fell in the same week as a really big Catholic conference that was put on by Reach. And I always kind of resented that, because I never got to do the full week of the conference because I had to go to football camp, and I hated football camp. That year we had switched football camps, and we were going over to Eastern Washington University for camp, and it was the week right before camp and conference. So for the first time, I was going to be able to go to camp and conference, which to me was really exciting. And so as another kind of moment of encounter, I was at football camp, and I remember my sister calling me just to say hi. And she had lived in, she was in Yakima, Washington, where the camp and conference was every year. And I remember just feeling this sense of excitement, and I just can't wait to see you. And I remember having this feeling of like, look, that's where I belong. And those people who I know who are going to be at conference are people that are really where I belong. And football camp is not really where I belong. People here aren't on the same page. So I was, when I was talking to her, I was late to dinner that night at football camp. And I was walking alone. I remember the shirt that I was wearing too, but I was walking alone, and I just started praying on the college campus. And I remember just having this sense of like, the Lord was there, and the Lord wanted me to be close to him, and he was inviting me to step away from everything. And and just this sense of like, I can't wait to see you, Fernando, at this retreat. And so anyway, it all happened. I went to conference. It was amazing. I remember just feeling like this sense of peace when I was there, a difference from the other parts of my life. And so 2 weeks before the first football game, So I was going to be a captain of our team, and I had started on varsity junior year. So there were some conversations happening about, trying to organize playing for a college, probably a junior college. Not that I was that good, and I'm short too. So, but anyway, 2 weeks before I came in early, and I asked my coach to talk, and he lives across the street from me. I've known him since I was in elementary school, and I ended up telling him that I was quitting, and it was one of the hardest decisions ever. I mean, especially as a high schooler. I ended up losing. I think just losing a lot of friends. I think a lot of people were just uninterested in continuing relationships with me. It was, it's a smaller town, and stuff, and people took football really seriously. So it was a hard decision as a 17-year-old. I took a real stand in terms of saying, like, hey, my faith is most important to me, and football is a hindrance on that.
Yeah.
So I made a decision early on, at that moment, to kind of cut out the root of the problem, which I knew exactly what it was. Plus, football wasn't even that fun at that point anymore. And it wasn't really, I think I felt like what I had taken from my junior year, I had really kind of squeezed a lot of the juice out of what a young person should take out of sports, which is learning how to work hard, learning how to fight through pain, and being a part of a team.
Yeah.
Being a leader. So I was ready to be done. And it ended up being a really freeing experience. I mean, I started playing guitar. I started doing other things and enjoying life. And I just received a lot of joy from that decision.
Did you have support from anyone? You were talking about the relationships that fell apart. Who was there with you to kind of support you?
So Brian Kraut, my youth minister, and I had a couple of friends. A couple of guys came into my life at the time who were also in a similar position.
Okay.
Morgan Young, still a brother of mine, and he there were a couple of relationships that were built at that point moving forward, that were from the youth group and from my parish that continue today, which is awesome. So at that point, I didn't really know what I was going to do with my life, and I decided to, because I wasn't planning on going to college now, because I wasn't playing football and I hadn't taken SATs or anything. So I decided to do youth ministry, and I joined not Reach in Washington, but Net Ministries in Australia. So I moved to Australia for a couple of years.
Oh, okay.
And there's a couple, I guess, in terms of sharing my story, in terms of like conversion or reversion.
Yeah.
I would say that time in high school was a moment where I can really identify as a time when I chose the faith, and I stepped away from that life of sin. I remember specifically, like, I mean, of course, I've always struggled since then, but I made a promise to myself that I would wait until my marriage, until my wedding night, and after that moment, and that happened. So I'm thankful for that I met a good woman. My wife Elizabeth has always been a faithful Catholic, and she accepted me with my past, as a high schooler, and it was really a beautiful thing to be able to say, which is, I unfortunately as a child, really, I made these mistakes, and that I recognize the sanctity of the marital act, and the sanctity of my sexuality, and I chose to wait until that day. So really awesome choice on my, and also just thankful for God's grace to be able to do that after the opposite, so really after that time in high school, I would say it's really just been a journey of kind of seeing what God has for me, and trying to find out what his will is, and trying to know him better, trying to know what it means to be a Christian and a Catholic.
Yeah.
And it's been a process. I mean, I did, yeah, I guess, do you have any questions, or I guess I can tell you more about
No,
after
no,
high school?
I was curious if in Australia and through net that you met other people that were like you or were able to counsel out. Yeah, you need to maybe explain net
Sure.
even more, just really expound it, because that's sounds fascinating to me.
Yeah. And that is really vital to where I'm at in my life, because so net really is a youth to youth ministry program that was started in Minnesota and then kind of went international at a certain time. I don't really know when. I think the 80s or something like that. But Net Australia is its own entity. It's not run by the Minnesota Net, but it is obviously affiliated. And it's a youth to youth ministry program that really, I don't know what the age cutoff is, but there's a lot of young people in their, out of high school or 20s who come on, and they are there to provide testimony to others on, on their experiences and their encounters, and to talk about the Lord, and to bring people to encounter Jesus. So that's what I did. And that it required like a 6-week training program at the beginning, which I really credit those 6 weeks to my human formation as a man, as a Christian man. There were really amazing encounters, opportunities to learn about what it means to be Christian, and also encountering the Lord in a profound way that happened during during those 6 weeks. And then after that, I lived in a country town in Queensland, Australia, as with a team of 5 people, 3 women and 2 men, and worked as chaplains for a Catholic college, high school. So I was just living and walking the faith with other people, and learning how to live with other humans and communicate, and how to resolve conflict, and how to pray together, and how to be a Christian adult, and with opportunities to pray every day, and opportunities to go to mass, and opportunities to evangelize to high schoolers. So I really credit that time for just kind of pushing me into who I am today, into adulthood, and to understanding what it means to be Catholic.
So when you were learning how to be a Christian man and prepping you to be a Christian father, what, if you could right now, what were the highlights of that? Because there are a lot of people, I mean, this was me just a few years ago, like, what is my identity? What is a Christian man?
First of all, I think one of the things that I learned, that I went through during those at the really big first 3 weeks, was the former director of NET. His name's Shane Bennett, in Australia. He ran a program to initiate men, and it was he had experiences with initiation through doing evangelization in Africa and other cultures throughout the world, where it led him to create his own kind of initiation program. And what I learned was, first of all, in order to be a man, first you have to be told you're a man, right? And then what a man is after that. But part of I think a lot of the struggle that I had realized was that, when you're a child, you act like a child. When you're a man, you ought to act like a man. And that was one of the mantras that he gave us during this initiation process. But to me, there are a couple things. First of all, that was one of the things about being a Christian. A Christian man was what the scripture verse that I just said, was that there are things that we're called to as men that we're not really aware of as children. Mm-hmm. And that entailed this whole world of exploration, which I've been on since then, right? In terms of growing in virtue, in terms of mastering yourself, in terms of being subordinate to God and to authority, the lawful and just authority. But also for me at that point, it was being dependent on brothers, and I made brothers. My friend Morgan Young from Idaho had joined me on Net Australia that year. So in terms of building bonds and brothers, there was an opportunity to really understand what it meant to lean on other men
Sure.
of the faith. And I would say that was essential to understanding what it meant to be Christian, was that, you know, so brothers, also mentors. I credit the experiences after going on net of seeing other men living the faith, um, as being very formative for me. Basically, I've always had a desire to have mentors and to ask questions and to say, what I'm going through this struggle, or even just, hey, I'm feeling this. What should I do?
Yeah.
And then having someone say, hey, that's normal, or put your feelings away, Fernando, or something of that nature.
Yeah. Right here, I'll tell the audience, Fernando and I and a group of another, I think 8 or so, have been doing Exodus 90, this pretty rigorous program to kind of step away from all the things of the world that entrap us. And Fernando has been, what you're talking about with mentorship, man. You've been so open about, hey, I need help. Hey, can I get some prayer here? Hey, what are your thoughts on this? And for me, what I've learned over the past few years is a big step towards understanding Christian manhood is humility. And in humility, only in humility can you ask for help or even advice on any level. So
We did an exercise with Shane that reminds me of what you just said. And we were out in the middle of a field. So just to give people kind of an idea, which because I have these experiences that I really sometimes I just want to share with people, but it's kind of weird. But so imagine, like, I forget how many guys, 20 men, 20 young men, and 10, older men in the middle of a field in Australia, wearing only board shorts, just doing things, doing faith stuff, talking about the faith. So one of the exercises that Shane did was he brought out all this red paint, and he gave everybody some red paint and a not a paintbrush. It was just red paint. And he said, okay, so I'm gonna, if I remember it correctly, basically it was something along the lines of listing off just a lot of sins. I'm going to oversimplify it, but something along the lines of listing a lot of sins, and then asking all of us to prayerfully to stick our finger in the paint and put a mark for every time that we've sinned, or have been wounded by something, which I'm pretty sure he did that too. And there were symbolic experiences that we exercised that were extremely powerful, because when we all looked up at each other, we were just covered in red paint. And we wore that paint for like 2 days straight during this time. And that was symbolic in terms of what you just said, which is learning how to be transparent in terms of our journey,
yeah.
In the faith with our wounds, but also just the reality of sin and the reality of how much we need Christ, was so powerful. I think that was also another moment where, not just that exercise, but also those couple weeks of initiation was a moment where I was able to move forward and say, like, I'm moving, this is my life, right? It was, I did have a couple of experiences during that time as well, like an encounter that I had with the Lord during a prayer session with the entirety of the team, where I do feel like I call that the moment of the point of no return, where I felt like I did have an encounter with the Holy Spirit during that time that I can't deny, and if I were to deny, I would be lying to myself. That's why I called it the point of no return, which is like I felt like a time of expressive prayer. Their net was involved with the charismatic community called Emmanuel community out of Brisbane, Australia, and which I really credit a lot of my conversion there too. I mean, I had that experience, and I felt the Lord really say to me, like, you're home, like this is where you belong. And I remember just laying there on the ground and knowing for sure, like this was it, man. Like this was the Lord, and just pure joy.
Yeah.
And so that's the way it's gone. I mean, I did another year of net after that, and it was very formative. It was really difficult. I learned a lot about myself. And then one thing that came to mind, you and I had talked earlier a little bit about being a Cradle Catholic and kind of the journey that a lot of us go on as Cradle Catholics, where a lot of us unfortunately end up leaving the faith.
Yeah.
After net, I came back to the U.S. and I was in Idaho, and and obviously I was still very faithful and everything at that time, but I kind of had some ideas that were leading me down a path that I think were potentially dangerous, a path that was dangerous. And I think I had some friends who were great people, love them to death. But I started doing stuff like I was hanging out with a lot of people of different denominations, including Muslims. And I just really I was listening to a lot of music. I mean, I was kind of a borderline hippie. And I was just like, I remember when I was in Australia I went to a concert. It was John Butler Trio in Melbourne, Australia. Great band. But kind of like, spiritually, what's the word? New agey, I guess. And he has this song that he plays called, I forget the name, but it's essentially he asks people to like pray, and whatever faith you have, just pray with me. And I remember just being so intrigued and so like enthralled by that experience, and just this kind of thought that I started hanging out with people of different faiths. I started praying with a lot of people of different faiths. I started praying with Muslim friends, and I started becoming intellectually interested and wanted to learn a lot. And I had received a lot of recommendations to go to different schools like Seattle University or other places like that. And I was told, like, you'd be a really good fit. And my point in sharing this isn't at all to create division between maybe my friends who are listening to this, but that I think that I was going down a path that a lot of Catholics go, where we start to kind of lose track of the tenets of the faith. We start to lose track of what we really believe, and essentially could potentially dilute our faith and lead us away from the church. And my mom pointed it out to me at one point, and I don't know if I agreed with her. I probably didn't, but thankfully my faith in Christ was still there. I still believed that Christ was the Lord and Savior, and I believed in the church's teachings. But I had a moment where I felt the Lord asked me to go to seminary. So I became a seminarian for the Diocese of Boise in 2008. And I was in seminary for one semester. Long story short, I feel like the Lord really just brought me back and wanted me to be a practicing Catholic and to make sure that like the teachings of the church were cemented into my heart, that I knew what we believed, meaning that God was God and Jesus Christ was his son, and that there are differences in terms of other beliefs, that God isn't just this figure that presents himself in different ways in every single faith, and that we're all really united at the end of the day, but that the gospel meant something, right? And that it meant something in my life and that the Holy Spirit had done something distinctly in my life through the church. And at that point, I had a lot of really good influences in my life, telling me you should, first of all, being in seminary was good, and starting to have an interest in philosophy and theology. And then after I discerned out of seminary, I decided that I wanted to go to Franciscan University of Steubenville, which is where I went to college and where I met my wife. And that ended up really just kind of sealing the deal in a sense, in terms of who I was, my faith.
Nice.
I got a degree in philosophy, and so it's never perfect. It's never like I have all the answers. That's what I love about this journey, is that it's just continual conversion,
Yep.
reconversion, and identifying, how much I need Christ, and just continual learning.
Yeah. Excellent, man. Yeah, I don't think that just because, when we use the word conversion, I know there's a lot of division over what does it mean to be justified? What does it mean to be sanctified? But it's undeniable as you walk through life, you have that moment of return. And that doesn't mean that you can just stroll around and kind of go back into the world and everything's perfect. You got to be on your guard the entire time, the rest of your life. That God's grace will enable you, but you're kidding yourself if you think that it's one and done. You could be, like you said, at 17 years old, if you had just said, "Thank you, God, I'll see you later." It doesn't work that way. You know what I mean? And that reminder that you mentioned where you guys were putting the red paint on yourselves is just, I don't know. It's important to remember what you've done, not to be identifying with it constantly, because there are pros and cons to these things. But when you are mature, you can look at those wounds, you can look at those sins, and you can say, "Thank you, Lord, for changing me, and please help me continue on this path," because that's it right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then one other thing I was going to mention, you said this early on about you realized that while watching Passion of the Christ during the scourging scene, that, mankind inflicted those wounds. And so I pulled up this thing from the catechism. I think it's so important that we get this part right. There's a section in the catechism that's called "All sinners were the authors of Christ's passion." And it says the church, this is in paragraph 598, for those that are curious about this. The church has never forgotten that sinners were the authors and the ministers of all the sufferings that the divine Redeemer endured. The church does not hesitate to impute to Christians the gravest responsibility for the torments inflicted upon Jesus, a responsibility with which they have all too often burdened the Jews alone. And that is such a definitive statement. It helps you remember how we're all sinners. And it also helps you remember, instead of pointing the finger, wanting to get the speck out of your brother's eye, you got to get the log out of your own eye, and realize that he took on everything, past, present, future. And so when you mentioned that, it just triggered that I had learned that recently, that this is not a matter of who was present. It's a matter of the net effect of what Jesus was doing.
Amen.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Where are you now? What can you share? What can you tell the audience about your journey here and now?
Well, I have 4 kids. I got married, and I feel like everything almost leading up to the time that I got married, I was really just wondering, like, what am I supposed to do with my life? Am I going to be a priest? Am I going to be married? Am I going to be, I don't even, it could be anything. So I feel like meeting Elizabeth and knowing that was it presented its own challenge in the sense that like, okay, what now? Right. Because now this is like the vehicle for the rest of my life. This is the vehicle for salvation. So what now? And it's been a journey of it's been a continual journey, right? So whether it be like, what am I going to do for a job? What am I going to do for to provide? Because we found out that essentially we had a honeymoon baby. So our daughter was born. She was actually born 1 month early. So she was born 8 months after our wedding
Wow.
date. And it's been great because I feel like in Elizabeth I found my real partner. The person who just first of all is patient with me, and but she really, I can tell that she loves me, she admires me, and that we're just walking together. And I feel the same way about her. I mean, when we got married, I was a liberal arts major who didn't really have any good prospects for jobs, and she was an officer in the Air Force and a nurse, and so she really carried me in a lot of ways and inspired me, to be the best that I could, to be something that maybe I didn't know that I could.
Awesome.
Um, and since then it's been a journey of walking together, of learning how to be an adult, learning how to um, do this well, but also be faithful while doing it. So now it's just this life now is just this constant recognizing where I'm failing, even though not to be negative, but it's recognizing my weaknesses and saying, okay, I can see how I could do that better. I
Sure.
can see how I could,
Yeah.
I can see how I could be a better parent. I could see how I could be less lazy, which are all like, those are like the little things of the faith, right? Like if you can do the little things well, then the big things won't be given to you.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's like that time of conversion is necessary to get to the place where you can just recognize the little things. And so that's why I'm doing Exodus 90. Not that I'm doing it very well, but like that's why I appreciate brotherhood, is because I need somebody to help me, to teach me how to do these things.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what it would be like to not have the Lord, because life is just as difficult for every person as it is for me. And we all have our coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
And not to call Christianity a crutch in any way, but I think that is so important in every walk of life, to recognize I don't have all the answers when it comes to my job, when it comes to family life, or friendship, or anything. So now it's just walking, and it's a journey. It's going to mass every Sunday. It's trying to be faithful in the small things.
Yeah.
And consistency. So it's, now I feel like my relationship with the Lord, sometimes I just want it to be like that encounter. I want it to be just like those times when I could feel like I could smell the Lord, right? That he was right here. And sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes it is more of an intellectual practice of saying, and I hate to admit that, but it is like, I know that the Lord is here. I know that he's with me. I know that he's going to help me, because he has so many times in the past. I could give you a ton of stories of times of just testimony of like, man, the Lord just came through on that, and that was a miracle. And so at times it's just getting up to pray and saying, and even though it may not seem like, oh, the Lord is really present. Well, he is. And when I get up in the morning and I do that, even if I'm dozing off or whatever, like I know that he's there. And it's not an easy walk, but that's why like guys like you and people around me and Elizabeth and are there to support that and to help me, to remind me.
Awesome.
Not to mention the sacraments. The sacraments are, yeah, it's so thankful that I'm Catholic. I'll say that.
Yeah. Hey, man, thank you so much. You're, yeah, I've said this to a lot of the guests, and I wholeheartedly mean it. You inspire me, and your family inspires me. And for those of you that watch this episode, please share it with others. And as a reminder, subscribe to the channel. I do want to interview more and more Cradle Catholics, because it's not just about the conversion from some other place within Christianity or outside of Christianity. There are many stories of Cradle Catholics that could have walked completely away, but they remained in the church, and they have just phenomenal reasons for doing so. And the Lord, they responded to his grace. So with that, until next time, take care and God bless. Bye.